Welcome to the G5 Hive and the next installment of our Worker Bee series, where we deep dive into the G5 college football landscape with the folks that know the teams the best. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you're listening in podcast form, please rate and review. Today, we'll be heading to Conference USA to take a look at the Louisiana Tech Bulldogs, who were 5-8 in 2024 and capped off their season with an appearance in the Independence Bowl. They wrapped up their 2025 spring practice with their spring game on April 26th. We have a special guest joining us today. He is the sports editor for the Ruston Leader. He covers everything Lincoln Parish athletics. He is a Cyclone graduate. He covers Louisiana Tech football. He is Matt Belinson. Matt can be found on X at Belinson. Matt, welcome to the show, Matt.
Hey, appreciate you having me on. Always looking forward to covering football season and talking some things out.
Yeah, it's lots of news here. It's early July. You had all the quote official conference realignment changes. You had the Delawares, the Missouri State are officially now in Conference USA. We see Texas State announcing that they're leaving the Sun Belt and headed to the Pac-12. And who knows? Maybe sometime soon we'll hear that Louisiana Tech might be headed to the Sun Belt. But before we kind of get started into the Louisiana Tech football talk, can you tell the folks a little bit about yourself and how long you've been covering Louisiana Tech football?
Yeah, like you mentioned, I graduated from Iowa State University in May of 2022. Came down here to Ruston, Louisiana, right out of college, and was looking for an opportunity to cover high school and college sports, and I've been given that opportunity. And yeah, like you mentioned, I have covered Louisiana Tech now. This will be my fourth football season covering the Bulldogs. I've covered the entire Sonny Cumbie era up to this point. I got here August of 22. That was his first season here in Ruston. So he and I have had a pretty good working relationship. I've had see the coaching staff turnover. Have seen just kind of he develop as a head coach, and I've seen this program obviously try to develop and kind of get out of its rut of losing seasons and trying to make its way back to a bowl game, earn its way back to a bowl game, I should say. So yeah, it's been good to cover Louisiana Tech here over the past couple of years. It's a great community. It's passionate about football. I think it's starving for the Bulldogs to be good again. And as we'll dive into here, I think there are certainly pieces in place where if it all lines up, this team could definitely get back to a winning season. But obviously that all has to click and all gel together at the same time.
Well, speaking of Sonny Cumbie, like you said, he heads into his fourth season, but they have made a switch with the offensive coordinator. He's hired Tony Franklin. This is Coach Franklin's second stint with the team. He previously served as the offensive coordinator from 2010 to 2012. He most recently was an offensive coordinator and a quarterbacks coach for the Army Sprint football team in 2022. Army Sprint is in the CSFL, or the Collegiate Sprint Football League, where players must weigh 178 pounds or less. But enough about the Sprint Football League. Can you tell us about and kind of describe the type of offense that Coach Franklin plans to run here at Louisiana Tech?
Yeah, obviously when Tech brought Coach Franklin back in here, obviously the fan base knows him quite well. Like you mentioned, his first stint at Louisiana Tech went pretty well. Obviously averaging over 50 points per game, and had a lot of great future NFL talent on his side to make that happen. I think it's going to be a little bit different compared to what we saw in years past. I think he's certainly going to have those air raid principles still a part of what he wants to do. He's certainly going to build off those things, but football has changed, and frankly, the personnel at Louisiana Tech has changed as well. Evan Bullock is a fine quarterback, but he's no Jared Goff, at Cal. And so I think as far as offensive philosophy, what we saw in spring a lot, it's a lot of quick game. It's a lot of RPO. It's a lot of let's get the ball out quick. We don't need to have Evan back there, making a lot of decisions. We're going to get into him, individually later on, and just his decision making. I think it's frankly a good thing. Again, I think there's still a lot of things worked out as far as the playmakers on this team. So we saw a lot of sprint outs, a lot of just quick screens, a lot of bubble screens, get the ball in receivers' hands, running backs' hands, and let's just get upfield as much as possible. That seemed to be the philosophy. They're certainly going to take their shots downfield here and there, but I would be surprised if they come out there in the opener against Southeastern and they're throwing the ball 30 yards down the field multiple times during the game. Certainly, if it dictates that, they can. But I think primarily, and from talking to players, in the spring, it seems like the identity of this team is let's get the ball out quick. Let's figure out ways to move a defense, with motion. Let's figure out ways to get playmakers, like you mentioned, with that speed, kind of utilizing some of that Army sprint. I think tactics to get the guys, the ball in their hands pretty quickly. I think that's going to be the key so far offensively, because I don't think, at least on paper, they have necessarily the traditional go-to, wide receiver, the traditional, hey, let's feed this guy, 10, 12 targets a game. I think it's going to be a lot of spreading the wealth. It's a lot of sharing the ball, figuring out different ways, different matchups per game, different drives, might see different guys on the field. I think it's going to be a lot of by committee and, frankly, a lot of positions. And I think if you're Louisiana Tech, I think that's the right approach to take, because I don't think right now offensively there's necessarily, a handful of guys where you're saying for sure these are our top playmakers going into the year. So I think with Coach Franklin, it's all about versatility. It's all about mixing and matching different things. And I think for him, he just wants, Evan to make quick decisions and get the ball out quick and figure out ways to move upfield as much as possible.
Well, let's start with the group that leads this Bulldog offense, and that's the quarterbacks. Last year, Jack Turner won the job, but Evan Bullock would take over duties September 28th against Florida International. He started the final 10 games of the season. Now that Turner has transferred, I would assume that means that Evan Bullock is the man heading into 2025.
Yeah, there's no doubt. He got the majority of the quarterback one reps, in the spring, and like you mentioned, given where he left off in the fall, he's proven the most in this system based on what they have coming back. Obviously, with Jack, transferring, he's someone that the staff has really enjoyed. Had previous experience with, some former offensive personnel that obviously left, and he went to join them. So yeah, Evan is definitely this team's starting quarterback going into 2025. Like you mentioned, he had a pretty decent, I think first true collegiate season. Really good completion percentage. 14 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Over 2,100 yards. It was a pretty good season. And again, I think we have to acknowledge that he just did not have a lot of playing experience at the college level prior to this season. So I think when you take that into account as well, I think you could say it was a pretty great season. Just given what a lot of young quarterbacks tend to do. Again, I think him going into the season knowing that it's his show, knowing that he's QB1, I think that gives him a confidence boost. I think that gives him a little bit more ownership as far as, hey, I'm going to dive into this playbook a little bit more. I'm going to lead by example, vocally a little bit more. And I think you saw that, in spring a lot of times, coming out of drives, going into huddles, I heard him more. Obviously, during games we're up in the press box, so I don't hear him anyway. But it just felt like on the field when we're watching the huddle and the operation, Evan had a much better grasp of that. Obviously, in fall camp, he's still going to have ways to go. I still think at times, and we might get into this in a second here, I think at times he gets in his own head. And I think at times he it's good, I think, to process, and I think it's good to always find the best play to make. But, at times I think he got in his own way. And so he certainly is going to be given the keys to this offense. I think at the same time, there's still room to grow. And I think you might see through the first couple of weeks, again, learning a new system, for the first time for a full season, you might see them, pull the reins back just a little bit to start to see if he's truly ready. And then I think if he can handle that, I would expect them to take the gloves off, and he's going to be ready to go.
For those not familiar with Evan's game, how would you describe it?
Again, I think it fits really well with what Coach Franklin wants to do. He's a guy that certainly can stretch the field. We saw that at times, definitely in the back half of the season, a couple touchdown passes here and there. But, for the most part, he's the guy that's going to try and, beat you over the middle of the field. He wants to get the ball out quickly. He definitely likes to attack the edges as well. He's definitely not a guy that, and again, maybe it's just part of, the fact that they didn't have the personnel to do it. He's not an over the top, let's just go to the post every single time and I'll just throw this 40-yard touchdown pass. Like, I think his arm strength was pretty decent. It wasn't the best that I've seen Louisiana Tech have here over the past couple of years with all the quarterbacks they shuffled in, but it's manageable. Given some more strength, conditioning, and I think some time in the weight room and some chemistry, maybe you'll be able to see some more downfield action from Evan. But primarily, he's a guy that if you need to pick up some third downs, if you need to just drive the football, you get easy completions. He proved last year that he can do that. Again, I think if you're looking for a quarterback that is going to scare defenses with his athleticism, someone that you can just give the ball to for pretty much the entire drive. I don't think that's Evan, and I don't really think they want him to be that. I think they kind of want him to be more that traditional, shotgun passer. He certainly can run if he needs to, but they're not just going to go quarterback power or just give him design plays to run. He certainly might scramble here and there, but he's definitely a guy that wants to get the ball to his receivers. He's a quick decision maker. And I think you saw last year, like I mentioned, he kept the turnovers down. He makes smart decisions, which again, I think at times, definitely led to some downfall as far as maybe protecting the football, in the pocket, and protecting himself. But I think you'll definitely take that over, giving teams, opportunities to return those for points.
As you mentioned earlier, Evan gained some valuable experience last year, and I don't know, for me, I feel like you could see the growth as the year went on. Now, as you said, heading into year two, knowing he is the starter, what kind of jump are you expecting to see from Evan here in 2025?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is pocket presence. You look back at his season last year, like you mentioned, you understood through the first couple of games that there would be some growing pains, and you'll give him some grace there. But there were multiple games in the back half of the season where you just have to get rid of the football. You just have to know where you are on the field. You just have to know where pressure is coming from at that point. And frankly, your offensive coordinator and your offensive play callers, they need to do a better job of putting him in position where he also doesn't need to think that much. I think it was a two-way street as far as not protecting Evan. Tech allowed 41 sacks last year. That was bottom 10 in the entire country. And certainly Evan was a part of that. He alone took more than 30 sacks. And I think if you go back through a lot of their games last year, I think it was a combination of faulty protection, not understanding how to get the ball out quick enough. And I think at times it was just him, just saying, "Hey, I just got beat there." I think pocket presence and pocket awareness, and frankly keeping drives alive. Again, he's not a dynamic athlete, but man, there might be times where again, this offensive line has a lot of new faces this year. There might be times where you're going to have to move. And I think Evan last year was kind of a statue. And I think at times, you saw a couple strip sacks where he was just completely blindsided and just hit from behind and the ball came out. I would imagine that the coaching staff is going to teach him this year and probably develop a system around him better where he doesn't have to think that hard and he doesn't have to hold on to the ball that much. I think that definitely can do damage to a young quarterback where you're hit that much and you're not even worried about getting the ball. You're worried about how much time do I have to even make a decision. So I feel like for him, the pocket presence is definitely number one. And then I think, like I mentioned before, if he can develop a downfield game, more consistently, if he can show people, hey, I have an arm where you guys have to honor me downfield, I feel like that will be able to unlock, a lot more in this offense. But I think as of right now, number one priority is pocket presence, and I think just taking care of the football when it comes to just holding on to it as far as fumbles and making sure that teams aren't able to strip you if and when they get hands on you.
Well, moving over to the running back room, the Bulldogs bring back their top two running backs from 2024, Mary Wiggins and Amani Givens. How did that duo look in the spring?
Again, I think I'm maybe kind of a broken record here when it comes to the offense outside of the quarterback. It was a lot of shuffling and it was a lot of kind of up in the air, to be honest. Again, it's a lot of guys that really last year it was their first opportunity that they really had to actually play collegiate football. Again, at the Division I level, I should say. Mary Wiggins again came from Coffeyville Community College. Again, Amani Givens did not have Division I experience. Like it's a lot of guys that I think really needed to get their feet wet, and also, frankly, when it comes to the quarterback and the running back room, this was not Tech's original plan. Like the original plan was that Jack Turner at quarterback was going to be their starter last year, and then they went to Blake Baker and then Evan Bullock. And then obviously running back wise last year, it was going to be Marquise Crosby. He was coming back from injury. You thought, okay, finally we can get him to be back, to be our workhorse. And then, things transpired and he was not able to play like they wanted to. So then they had to kind of go to Amari and they had to go to Amani and, Fred Robertson and some others. And so I think so far, it definitely feels like Amari is definitely going to be, I guess if you want to call it the bell cow, the main running back for this team. I don't anticipate he's going to be a guy where you're going to hand it off to him 15 times a game or something like that. But, maybe 10 to 12 carries for him. And then I think you give Amani maybe 8 to 10 carries. And then you give Fred Robertson, a kind of, maybe 5 to 7, something like that. I think it's definitely a running back by committee approach. But I would say if you're telling me who's going to get the majority of the carries, I would say right now it's probably Amari. He definitely emerged over the back half of last season when some injuries came up, and he definitely had some good games over the last couple of games of the season. And I think he proved that he's got the home run ability. He definitely can show that he can handle a large workload as far as carries. I think passing game out of the backfield is maybe something that I think the running back room in general, I think has to do a little bit better job of. And I think, frankly, offensively, I think they kind of found something good with some of their receivers last year that they maybe felt that they just didn't need to include the running backs as much. I would expect Amari to play a bigger role just in general in the offense this year. I would expect in general that just him to be the main guy, regardless of it, if that's pass catching out of the backfield or just getting carries. And yeah, I think run game wise, again, when you're talking about Coach Franklin, it's certainly going to be a part of it. I definitely feel like he wants to unlock Evan at the quarterback position, and I think it starts with the quarterback position. Frankly, obviously, you need a good run game to build off of that with, and I certainly think O'Mari's going to get those opportunities. But if you're asking me offensively, I still feel like this is going to be a pass. This is going to be a pass first team, and then maybe run game can come a little bit later, and O'Mari can certainly get those touches as the year goes on.
Well, like you mentioned, it's going to be somewhat of a committee, and you did a great job explaining what O'Mari's play style and strengths were. What would you say Amani's and Fred's what do their skill sets lead them, or what do they excel at?
I would say for Fred, he's definitely a physical runner. They call him the bulldozer. He's definitely someone where they like to, I think, just give him the ball and just kind of let him go to work. And again, I think with Fred, he's a guy, he grew up in this state. He understands the physicality of playing football in Louisiana. And I think, frankly, with Fred, again, he's just a guy that I just don't think has been given, the amount of carries to where you truly know, what type of body of work he can be. Again, last year, under 20 carries, it's kind of one of those things where, at times like he looked good, but he's only in for 2 plays in a series and then he's not in the rest of the game. So he's kind of one of those players where I liked what I've seen, but we really haven't seen as big of a workload to really understand what he can do in this offense. And I think in a new offensive system like this, where I think Coach Franklin is probably going to start off with guys that have proven it before. And then I think maybe we'll start to see a little bit shuffling in here and there. And then I think with Amani, I think it's similar to Amari as far as he's definitely a guy where you can give the ball to him a couple times, during a series. He's not going to get tired. I don't know if he has the speed that Amari has, but that being said, I think he's definitely a guy that you can rely on to kind of be that, that two-headed punch if you want with Amari. I definitely feel like he's a guy where you can, hand off, potentially, hey, Amari, take a seat for these next 2 series. Amani's got it. And then, hey, these next 2 series, Amari's got it. It definitely feels like their play styles complement each other. I think you saw that translate, as far as the overall carries last year. Again, I know Amari finished with over 100 and, Amani's finishing with about 75. So it definitely leaned more towards Amari, but I definitely feel like as you saw that towards the end of the season, those two definitely were the yin and yang, and we're going to trade off series and potentially even drives with them. So I'm really curious to see, how that's going to look as far as what Coach Franklin wants to do. And maybe I think play style wise, I think it definitely fits Amari first, but I think Amani is similar enough that you could see him shuffle in and out for a lot of different things.
Who do you think gets that first running back carry against Southeast Louisiana?
I would probably go Amari, just given just what he proved last year. I think as far as the bulk of the carries, again, is Amari going to finish with the most carries in that game? Who knows? Because I would imagine Tech's probably going to be up pretty big in that game, so you probably could see some different faces shuffled in and out. But as far as the first series, the first carry, I would imagine that it's going to go to Amari Wiggins.
Well, let's turn our attention over to the wide receivers, and their leading wide receiver from a year ago and first team all conference, True Edwards, is off the NFL. Their second and fourth leading wideouts, Jimmy Holiday and Abdul Fattah Ibrahim, have graduated. That leaves Jay Wilkerson as the leading returning wide receiver. Matt, what are the expectations for this wide receiver room as we head into 2025?
I think similar to the offensive line, which we'll get into in a little bit, I think wide receiver and offensive line are the biggest question marks offensively for this team. Like you mentioned, there's been a lot of turnover over the past couple of years. Even if you go back a couple years ago, losing Trey Harris to Ole Miss, losing Smoke Harris to graduation. I mean, there's been a lot of guys that have proven production at Louisiana Tech, but you just have not been able to keep them, whether it be to graduation or the portal. And like you mentioned, True had a really good season last year. It kind of burst onto the scene. You definitely did not expect that, just given what he did, previously at the college level. So yeah, I think the wide receiver room, it's a lot of guys that are coming in from previous places, or a lot of guys that frankly have been here at Louisiana Tech that have not proven, frankly, a whole lot. I think there's some intriguing athleticism in the room. I think, in the springtime, definitely some standouts. I think when you're talking about Devin Gandy, he's a Sacramento State transfer, had some pretty good, seasons at Sacramento State, career-wise, close to 70 catches, 890 yards, 5 touchdowns. Definitely in the spring, it seemed like him and Evan were kind of I don't want to say the go-to option, but it definitely feel like there was a big play to be made. Devin ended up usually being that guy. We talked to him multiple times in the spring, and it definitely feels like Tech is going to include him a lot this year. I think again another guy that they brought in from the transfer portal, Marquez Singleton, from the community college, again out in California, 72 receptions, over 927 yards, 12 touchdowns. He's definitely a guy that's going to be involved. Again, I think when you're talking about guys that are coming in from the transfer portal, this is a late addition. We did not see him in spring practice, but David Piero, he's a junior from Diablo Valley, College in California. Last year, 65 catches, 866 yards, 6 touchdowns. Again, it's a lot of junior college, a lot of smaller school transfers. Again, a lot of those guys, that I just named have certainly proven production at their levels before, but I think for Louisiana Tech standpoint, I think it's still kind of a case-by-case basis of can we really trust them to be the focal point of our offense? And I think as far as returners in that wide receiver room, there's a lot of question marks, and I think that's why you're seeing such a heavy emphasis on transfers being brought in. Again, Marlon Jackson, he's been here 2 years. This is a Sonny Cumbie recruit. He's been here 2 years and he has 1 touchdown and 26 total catches. Like, it just has been disappointing as far as the receivers that Tech has cultivated and developed in this room. Again, Dedrick Latulis, he's a guy that's recruited by Sonny, 4 catches for 2 yards. It's just a lot of guys that have either been not given opportunities because they've just been depth chart casualties, or it's been guys that have been given opportunities and just for whatever reason have just not been able to make enough plays on the ball. So wide receiver room, I would imagine that they're probably going to continue to add. I mean, I would just not be surprised by that, given the mystery that I think they don't really know who's going to be the number 1 target for this wide receiver room. Again, I think Devin Gandy certainly is going to. I think on paper right now is probably the go-to option. I think Marlon Jackson is probably in that line as well, but I think wide receiver room wise in the spring, they made some decent plays on the ball. There were certainly times during the spring where the offense definitely won the day and they made some nice plays, but I think by and large, there's a lot of question marks. And I think, frankly, there's a lot of guys that have to prove that they can earn playing time and a lot of guys that can prove that, hey, I can be a playmaker in this new offensive system. I think we're still kind of waiting to see how that shakes out in fall camp.
Well, prior to Coach Franklin, it seemed like the primary receiver was always the slot guy, at least over the last 3 seasons. In Coach Franklin's system, does it lend itself to the slot guy, outside guy, or is it pretty even?
I think it's pretty even. Talking to Devin Gandy actually, in the spring, he felt like he lined up in multiple positions at Sacramento State, and he feels like this is a system, Coach Franklin's system, I should say, definitely feels comfortable to him. It definitely feels like he can kind of mix and match as far as where they need to line him up. Like you mentioned, over the years, I think it's probably inflated a little bit just because Smoke Harris did so much, for this group over the last couple of years that I think a lot of those numbers, obviously it's a luxury to have a player like that. They've certainly had some good slot receivers, since Smoke has graduated, but I think by and large, he definitely kind of lended itself to the offense driving itself through him. And I think a lot of times they just kind of fed the ball, to the slot just because he was there. I certainly feel like I mentioned, Coach Franklin, this offensive system, again, with the sprint outs, with the screen game, you certainly can find guys and kind of motion them either in or to the slot. Out of the slot, they can figure out ways to get the ball in guys' hands. When you're talking about just slip screens and just things like that, we saw that a lot last year when it came to True Edwards, Jimmy Holiday. It felt like a lot of times they would kind of line up outside and then motion in a little slip screen, get the offensive line moving, get some wide receivers moving upfield, kind of in a screen, I guess, in that sense. So I certainly feel like the slot will be involved in the offensive system. I don't think it's going to be the focal point necessarily when it comes to the pass game. I certainly feel like it's going to be a lot of outside the numbers. Let's figure out ways to get the ball just really quickly into guys' hands, and again, whether that's a screen or maybe just kind of double moves and things like that. I really don't anticipate there's going to be a slot heavy offense. And then again, if Devin Gandy and Evan Bullock really find a connection in the slot, from Marlon Jackson, on the outside, maybe becomes that guy where that it frees up Devin in the slot more. Maybe they'll figure out some things. I think truly it all comes down to who really earns their time on the field and who really earns the opportunity and who fits where. I think until we see that, I think it's really tough to say like, hey, yes, plug this guy into this position, plug this guy into this position, because I think right now it's just a lot of, shrug emoji. It's a lot of guys that I think look good on paper, but they have not really established themselves as, hey, this is where I'm going to play, week in, week out.
Well, with that coaching change, have you been able to learn? What have you been able to learn in terms of how the tight ends will be utilized in the offense?
Eli Finley is definitely going to get a lot of playing time this year. He's definitely, I think, going to be. You want to talk about a focal point of the offense. I definitely feel like you're going to see that from him this year. 25 catches last year. Pretty decent season. Again, I think True and Jimmy Holiday were definitely the primary playmakers as far as the passing game for this team. But Eli certainly had his moments. But I definitely felt like at times where there would be games where you would go in and he's fed the ball early. He's given opportunities to score in the red zone. And then there would be times where you look up at the end of the games and it's like, Eli Finley, 3 targets, 1 catch. It's like, do we really want to involve him in the game plan here? So I definitely feel like just given the question marks at the wide receiver position, Eli's been in the system for, Eli's been in this program, I should say, for a number of years. And I definitely would anticipate that he's going to be given opportunities to score. He's just got a physical skill set and a physical frame that I think lends itself to being a third down target. It lends itself to being a short yardage guy where if you just definitely need someone to make a play for you, it seems like it's going to be him. Now, again, they brought in some different tight ends from some different schools before. But again, when you talk about Luke Sabe, from UTEP, again, he played 5 games in 3 years at UTEP with 1 catch to his name. Braden Blocker, again, 11 catches, in 10 games last year at Saddleback. It's a lot of guys in that tight end room. Eli is definitely, when you talk about just, I guess, proven production, he's definitely the one that has proven the most at the collegiate level. And so I definitely feel like for him, I think the physical skill set is there to make plays. I think it's a matter of can this offense truly involve him? Like I mentioned, if you go through his box scores last year, he's the 4-game stretch where he has less than 3 catches. So it's one of those things where does the offense truly want to get him involved? And if they do, are they going to stick with him, when teams potentially game plan against him? Because I don't think you can have a guy like that on the field and not try and find ways to get him the ball. So I would anticipate that if we're talking about the tight end usage, I think we're going to look up, halfway and at the end of the season and say Eli Finley was probably the most involved as far as pass catching at the tight end position. Certainly, Luke could maybe involve himself in the blocking game, but I think as far as what they've proven at the collegiate level, Eli is 100% this team's number 1 tight end and will be given those opportunities.
Well, moving over to the offensive line, they'll be looking to replace 3 of those starters. They do return center Landon Nelson and right tackle Hayden Chrisman, and they didn't bring in many transfers. So I'm assuming the staff kind of likes what they already had in this room. How did they look in the spring?
Yeah, like you mentioned, definitely some surprising moves on the transfer portal. Again, I think when you talk about obviously, Jamarian Kennedy, I think he was definitely one that surprised the staff, just given the nature of he kind of went through spring and then just transferred. So it was kind of one of those deals where you're surprised to see that. Just given he was given the opportunity to be on the starting offensive line rotation in spring. It's not like this was a guy that just was not getting playing time. So definitely a blow to this offensive line. But like you mentioned, I think I like the tackle. Just the tackle depth. I think of where they're at right now. Kenneth Bannister is going to kind of slide into that left tackle role. He's a guy that played, towards the back half of last season, started 3 games. He's a guy that's been in the program a couple years now. I like what he can bring at left tackle. It seems like they're going to plug him in there. And then, like you mentioned, Hayden at right tackle. He's still a relatively young guy, but he showed some flashes last year as far as just being a dependable guy. You don't really have to worry about him. He definitely got beat pretty badly on some plays that I can kind of remember pretty vividly. But I think overall, I definitely think he got better the more he played. And I feel like another season at that right tackle position is definitely going to serve him better. Like you mentioned, Landon Nelson, this is his 4th season here at Louisiana Tech, 6th in college overall. So he's seen the game. He knows how to play the center position. And I think Louisiana Tech definitely wants him to be the anchor and definitely that first line of communication with a young quarterback still in Evan. I definitely feel like he's going to be the anchor of this offensive line. I think the questions right now are the guard spots. Like you mentioned, I think at right guard, I think as of right now, just on what I have heard coming out of spring, and I think just in the offseason, it feels like Jonathan Dennis, a guard they brought in from Central Missouri. He started 9 games there last year. It would seem like he's probably going to fit in that right guard role. And then I would imagine that left guard is probably still a battle between Ashanti Cole. He's a transfer from Grambling in years past. And then, Roy Brackens is a guy that they recruited here a couple years ago. I would imagine that those 3 collection of players are probably going to be battling it out at the guard spot. Based on what my notes say from spring, it seems like Jonathan was lining up more on the right side. Obviously, things can change in spring. Maybe they just want to try him out at left, and maybe that's where he ends up. But I would say if you're asking me right now, it seems like Jonathan's going to end up at that right guard spot. And then I think potentially Ashanti Cole in that left guard spot. Maybe Roy Brackens can emerge and just take that spot from Ashanti. But I definitely feel like the guard spots, if you're asking about offensive line question marks, it's definitely a good thing to have, the stability at center. But then I think the two guys right next to him, there's definitely some question marks. And I think tackle wise, you feel good, but I definitely feel like, you could be a little bit stronger. So, maybe there'll be some portal pickups here and there, but I think by and large, I think they're going to roll into this season with Hayden and Kenneth at the tackle spots. And then I think they're going to try and roll the dice and see if someone can really earn those guard positions.
Who does this line look to as the leader of it?
Without a doubt, it's Landon. I think it's a guy, like you mentioned, he's been here 4 years. He's a guy that has played a lot of college football. He knows what it takes to call offensive line signals. He knows what it takes to communicate with quarterbacks. And frankly, just talking to him in spring, he's motivated. This is a guy that has seen this program, before Sonny Comby. He's seen this program, obviously he wasn't here when they last made their bowl game, but he's a guy that has a lot of pride in Louisiana Tech. He's not one of these guys that has hopped around 5 different schools in 5 years, and he doesn't really have a lot of loyalty or kind of familiarity with the system. Landon has been here, and this is his final collegiate season. This is a guy that's motivated to go to finish on top, and I think you saw that in the spring. He was leading guys along. They were coming off the field. They were kind of dapping him up. They were just chatting with him. He's definitely the guy that I think kind of sets the tone, not only for the position that he plays, but I think just the seniority and what he's seen at the collegiate level, I think lends itself to guys turning to Landon to say, hey, just lead this group, set the tone, and allow yourself to communicate, and allow this whole line, frankly, to communicate with Evan as he leads this offense.
If you were to pick an offensive player to have a breakout type season in 2025, who would that be?
It's an interesting question because, like I mentioned, I think there are some interesting candidates, just a lot of guys that have proven themselves at some other schools and some other levels of collegiate football. I think right now on paper, I would probably go Devin Gandy, Sacramento State transfer wide receiver. Again, this is a guy that stayed the course pretty much his entire career at Sacramento State. Again, over close to 900 receiving yards. His career at Sacramento State, close to 10 touchdowns. I think this is a guy that you saw in spring make explosive plays on the ball. This is a guy that I think as spring got along, you saw him and Evan at the quarterback position really kind of emerge as I think the guys when you needed an explosive play to be made. I think it's tended to be Evan and then Devin, on the outside. That being said, again, it might not be Devin, but I think when you're talking about the experience at the collegiate level and frankly the Division I level, I think he proved that over the past couple of years at Sacramento State, and he proved that he can be that explosive playmaker. And I think if you're Louisiana Tech, I think it's giving him the ball as early as possible. I think is a great way to test his ability to be that explosive playmaker. Because I think a lot of times last year we went into the 2024 season with a similar position of, is it going to be True Edwards? Is it going to be Jay Wilkerson? Is it going to be Jimmy Holiday? I think it took time to give True Edwards that opportunity to be that explosive playmaker. I think if you're Louisiana Tech and you're Evan Bullock and you're this offensive system, I think the earlier that you can get Devin involved and just prove to Evan and Devin that connection is there, I think build that chemistry from day one, game one, I think that would be a really big deal. So I would definitely say if you're asking me to pick someone, it's probably going to be Devin on the wide receiver position.
Well, moving over to the defense, and just like the offensive side of the ball, there's a new coach here too. Coach Cumbie has hired Luke Olson to be his defensive coordinator. Coach Olson was previously the defensive coordinator at Jacksonville State in 2024. Prior to that, he was a senior defensive analyst at TCU. In 2022, he was a defensive coordinator for Tulsa. Can you describe the defensive scheme that Coach Olson plans to run here at Louisiana Tech?
Yeah, they want to be multiple. They're obviously going to be a 3-3-5 base, which is pretty similar to what Louisiana Tech ran last year with Coach Jeremiah Johnson. They can go to a 3-3-6 if they need to. Maybe a 4 down here at times. I think, frankly, it's all going to depend on what they can get out of that defensive line up front. I would say, just baseline is going to be a 3-3-5. Just traditionally, it's honestly what the majority of college football is nowadays. But I think it's going to lend itself well to Louisiana Tech because I think, honestly, the back end of this defense, when you're talking about the linebacker core and then the defensive backs, I think that's definitely where the strength of this team is. And I think allowing, more of those guys to be on the field, allowing more of those guys to get their hands on the ball, be physical, I definitely feel like it's going to lend itself well for this defense that, like you mentioned, has gone through, I think, again, a lot of upheaval. I think a lot of people were hoping that Jeremiah Johnson will be back after leading this defense to be in a top 12 unit last year. He and along with a couple other assistant coaches left for Coastal Carolina. So he left Louisiana Tech in a position where they had to reload defensively once again. And Like you mentioned, Coach Olson, he helped lead Jacksonville State to a Conference USA title last year with a really good defense in a lot of different categories, particularly taking the ball away. So I definitely feel like when you're talking about defensively at Louisiana Tech, I don't think he wants to change too much. I think he recognizes that there are a lot of guys that are going to try and learn a new system. And I think so. Just keeping it simple, the 3-3-5 system that a lot of guys have played under at multiple stops before, I think is a good start. And then I think as you move along, maybe you can get a little bit more multiple and add some different wrinkles. But I think right now it's probably just going to be a base 3-3-5.
Well, let's dig into those position rooms that Coach Olson will be coaching. Let's start with the guys up front along that defensive line. Whether by graduation or the portal, this room saw a lot of production leave. 8 of their top 10 linemen in terms of snaps are gone. Probably none bigger than first-team all-conference lineman David Blay, who's off to Miami, Florida. This room looks like it's going to probably have to lean on Christian Davis here in 2025. How did the defensive line look in the spring?
Again, it's one of those groups I think similar to the wide receiver room where it's a lot of guys, shuffling in and out. It's a lot of guys that were brought in from the transfer portal that I think still have to prove themselves. Again, I think there were some intriguing returners, like you mentioned with Christian Davis, a Ruston High, local product that he played in all 13 games last year. He didn't explode as far as production, but the staff certainly trusted him to come in some big games. He played against Arkansas, he played against Jacksonville State. So they certainly trusted him to kind of be that run stuffer, just be a big body in the middle of that defensive line. I would anticipate, like you mentioned, that he's going to play and see the field this year. Again, I think talking about transfers, there's a lot of question marks, but I think some intriguing pieces that can maybe lend themselves to kind of being the leaders on that defensive line. I think a Donovan Ryman, from Kansas State. Again, it's intriguing as far as the athleticism. 6'4", 258 pounds, but again, he played 3 years at Kansas State and he had 27 defensive snaps. So it's one of those things where it's like you're basically just continuing to bet on production, continuing to bet on what you saw come out of high school. And again, I think another guy similar to that, I think is an Emmanuel Ogans, from Tyler Junior College. Again, 2 years there, he had 3.5 sacks, 4 tackles for loss. He's a guy that Sonny Cumbie, particularly named in spring as far as someone that was standing out. But again, as far as proof production at the college level, I think there's still a lot to be desired. So I think defensive line-wise, there's a lot of guys that are going to be shuffled in and out. I think you're going to see a lot of guys thrown into different spots. I think, again, a Donovan Ryman is definitely someone I think they're going to line up and probably start on the edge. I think an Emmanuel Ogans is definitely someone they're going to start off on the edge. I think a guy like a Jaden Madkins, from Tyler JUCO. I think, again, he did lone season there. A pretty decent year, 5 tackles for loss, 4 sacks. Again, I think that's a guy that you're going to shuffle maybe potentially in and out. Zion Nason, he's a guy that's been at Louisiana Tech for 3 years now, 6.5 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks, 49 tackles this past season. Played 4 games this past year. I think, again, he's definitely someone where you look at him as someone that can, maybe, take a step forward as, now he's going to be asked to do more, just given the production that's left that room, like you said. So it's a defensive line, like the coaching staff, that has a lot to overhaul. It's a lot of question marks. And I truthfully am kind of concerned about it, to be honest. I just think when you talk about, again, David Blay leaving, there's, the Michael Clarks leaving, Jaden Grays, there's a lot of guys, Jaden Burnett's, there's been a lot of guys that have done some really good things for this defensive line that I think you're basically asking this group to basically restart. And, I was just looking at their sack totals here, since Jalen Ferguson and Milton Williams, I should say, played here in 2018 and then 2019. This has been, Louisiana Tech sack leaders just as far as production. 2021, Ben Bell, 3.5 sacks. 2022, Jaden Cole, 3.5 sacks. 2023, Deshaun Hall, 3.5 sacks. And then obviously David had 6.5 last year. But man, if you look at the last couple of years, outside of Jalen and Milton, it's a lot of 3.5 sacks. It's a lot of basically non-production out of the defensive line room. So I think, frankly, Louisiana Tech is just as curious as we are. I don't really think they understand at this point who is going to be that dominant guy off the edge or that run stuffer up the middle. I think they're still looking to find that guy. So I think as of right now, there's going to be those names that I mentioned are definitely going to get their opportunities. But I think at this point in spring that it was kind of unclear as to who's going to be the guy that if you need a sack on third down, who's going to be giving that to you. I frankly don't know at this point.
Well, last season we saw David Blay kind of take his game to another level, reached all conference, led the team in sacks. If you were to pick a lineman to not necessarily be an all conference guy, but to just kind of raise his game to another level in 2025, who would that be?
I'll go with Zion Nason. Again, I think he's been here 3 years. I think this coaching staff trusts him. He's going to get a lot of run in this defense. Again, is he going to have a 10 sack season? Probably not. But I think if you could get him up to close to that 6 sack range, 7 sacks, something like that, and then you maybe have one of those transfer pieces, get maybe close to 4 or 5 sacks. I think that you're in good shape at defensive line. But I think again, if you're asking me, I guess proven production wise and who I feel like could be that guy for this team, I think it's probably Zion. Again, that's not to say that a Donovan Ryman from Kansas State, maybe if he's given the opportunities and truly plays a lot of defensive snaps, maybe he emerges and becomes that that guy off the edge. But I think if you're asking me who's gonna emerge and become that guy for this defensive line, I think it's probably Zion Nason.
Let's move over to the linebackers. And, despite graduating Zach Zemos and CJ Harris, it looks like, they'll be in pretty good shape, returning the likes of Colby Fields, their leading tackler in 2024, and Sifa Leota. How did the linebackers look in the spring?
Really good. Like you mentioned, I think this is the strength of the defense. Colby Fields, I would anticipate that he's going to be in the running for Conference USA Defensive Player of the Year. He just does so many things well for this group. And then, like you mentioned, then it goes further from him with, obviously Sifa Leota. And then obviously they got some pretty intriguing young linebackers as well, too. I think a Colton Deckard, I think a Jaden Mayfield are definitely two other linebackers that you could watch as far as maybe rotated in and out and maybe, frankly, playing alongside those guys at times. I think, again, but it starts with Colby and Sifa. I think you saw last year that they can do a lot of different things in this defense. They can play in the box. They can play out of the box. They can pressure the quarterback. I think they can be asked to do different things in coverage. I think the linebacker room for this team is going to be really good again. I'm really curious to see how they're deployed. Again, I think with Jeremiah Johnson last year, he was all about attack. He was all about being aggressive. And I think it lended itself to Colby's game where he's a guy that wants to be around the ball. He wants to be making plays, kind of getting the scrum. And I think it frankly lended itself to him having a really great season. Is Coach Olson going to deploy those linebackers in the same way? I would anticipate that he is, but again, you never know. There's always different wrinkles in a defensive system. So, maybe the linebackers production will take a step up and, maybe they'll take a step back. But I really liked what I saw in the spring. It looked pretty much similar to what we saw, in the fall season and, in 2024. And I'm really curious to see if they can lead this defensive band because on paper, when you're talking about proven production defensively, there's certainly some really good defensive backs, which we'll get to here in a second. But I think linebacker-wise, it's Colby, it's Sifa, and then I think it's Colton, and then maybe Jaden as far as the linebackers that are going to lead this room.
What does it mean to this team to have, a player of the caliber of Colby Fields return back and help lead them in 2025?
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. And I think, like you mentioned, I think the biggest standpoint, number one, is that he returned. I think, again, you talk about a player like that kind of burst onto the scene after, frankly, just kind of, playing in the background at LSU and South Carolina to start his collegiate career. And then he obviously has to sit out a year at Louisiana Tech. And so you're still waiting to see, okay, is Colby Fields the real deal? And then, obviously, does what he does last year, obviously leads this team and I guess returning tackles and obviously lead this team in tackles for loss as well. And so he's definitely a player that I'm just really intrigued to see how he's going to be deployed. Again, I think he can do so many different things. He showed that he can make plays on the ball, had an interception or two. Again, he can be the guy that tackles behind the line. He's a guy that can just wrap up really efficiently. But I think overall, from Louisiana Tech standpoint, I think when you're building a defense and you're trying your best to keep up the defensive momentum from last year, I think having a guy at the center of that defense, having a guy at the core of that defensive identity that wants to be that attack, that physical linebacker, I think it's huge. And again, he's a guy that has been waiting his turn. He's wanted this opportunity. Again, like I mentioned, did not play a whole lot at South Carolina and LSU, and then had to sit at Louisiana Tech. He's definitely a guy that does not take things for granted. And I think you saw that this past year where, he's going 100 miles an hour at times. And, obviously he ended, the 2024 season injured. But obviously, thankfully for Louisiana Tech, he was able to play in the spring, and we saw him play pretty efficiently. So he's definitely a guy that if he stays healthy, Louisiana Tech is definitely going to be grateful that he's on their team.
Last year him and Zach made a really great duo. I assume this year it's going to be him and Leota.
I would anticipate, but again, I would also keep an eye on Colton Deckard. Again, he's a guy that as far as their depth chart, and I think his playing time, went last year. He was kind of Zach's, kind of number two. When Zach shuffled in and out, and I think at times when they had some blowout opportunities, Colton was definitely on the field, and I think Jaden as well. But I would probably say Colton, ahead of Jaden as far as, potential playing time. But if you're talking just running baits, at the linebacker position, it's Colby and Sifa for sure, but just because they've proven so much at the collegiate level, and definitely last year as far as just being the aggressors of that defense, I would definitely anticipate that they're going to be the dynamic duo of this linebacking core.
Let's move over to the defensive backs. And despite losing cornerback DeMarcus Griffin-Taylor to graduation, this defensive secondary may be one of the strongest position room, along with linebacker, on the defensive side of the ball heading into 2025. They returned several key guys like safety Jacob Fields, Michael Richard, and cornerback Cedric Woods. Other key pieces returning are safeties Mekhi Mason, Jakari Foster, and cornerback Jamal Shelby Jr. What should we expect from this secondary heading into 2025?
I think, like you mentioned, there's a lot of really great options. I think honestly, if you don't think linebacker is the strength of this group, I honestly could hear an argument for defensive backs. I think there's a lot of really intriguing athletes that have proven that they can get their hands on the ball. A lot of guys that are hard hitting tacklers. A lot of guys that definitely can just disrupt the ball as far as pass breakups. Like you mentioned, I think it definitely hurt when you talk about the defensive back rooms as far as what they lost. I think they really were anticipating that Blake Thompson was going to be back at safety, along with Mike and Jacob Fields. And then obviously he transfers to Houston in the offseason. And, like you mentioned, they're still waiting to hear on DeMarcus, I think, with his eligibility ruling, at cornerback. If they were able to potentially hear pretty soon to get him back, I think that would be huge. But I think at cornerback, I think it's great to get Cedric Woods back for his 6th collegiate season. He's just a veteran. He's a proven guy. He knows exactly what to do. Like you mentioned, I think at times, in the spring, we saw different guys line up opposite him at that cornerback position. I think, like you mentioned, we saw Jamal Shelby. He's a guy that proved, he played 9 games last year. He's been in this program for 3 years. He had a pretty decent season. Only 1 interception. I think they definitely would like to see him make, more plays on the ball. But I definitely would anticipate that Jamal would potentially get those number 2, cornerback reps as far as alongside, Cedric. But if it's not Jamal, I definitely would keep an eye on Noah Bigelow. He's a transfer from Pittsburgh. Brought in from the transfer portal. 20 games in 4 seasons there. He got a lot of run on the spring. You definitely saw his number, called a lot of times as far as the first team defense. I think he's definitely going to get a lot of opportunities in that cornerback position. I think safety-wise is definitely where I think it's intriguing, and I definitely like what I saw. Michael Richard, he did not play the back half of the spring season with injury, and then, Jacob Fields had some off-field trouble, this summer for Louisiana Tech, so I think his status going into 2025 is still TBD. So I think if those two are playing and on the field, I think you have some really great safeties. I think if those two continue to, just aren't able to play, I think you could run into some trouble. I think they have some intriguing, safety options. Again, I think when you talk about, again, a JT Jackson, a transfer from Garden City Community College, this is a guy that proved, again, he played some corner too, but I think if you wanted to put him in that safety role, I think you definitely could. If Jamal Shelby doesn't end up playing quarter, maybe you slot him over to safety, maybe try and just get his ball skills on the field a little bit. So I definitely feel like there's some great options in this defensive back room. I think it's a really good mix of veterans and some intriguing returners. And I definitely feel like if you're talking about strength, I definitely feel like the cornerback room definitely has some proven guys that I think it starts with Cedric as far as the proven playmakers and guys that can be shut down to opposing offenses.
Well, let's say this secondary is lights out here in 2025. In this scenario, who's responsible for that success?
It's a great question because I think, again, it all depends on who's healthy and who's playing the most. I think if he's healthy, I honestly feel like Michael Richard is in for a really big season. He missed 3 games, unfortunately, last year due to kind of a scary injury in conference play and, had to miss a couple games. But even when he did play, I still remember the first game of the first, the first play, I should say, of the first season last year. Nichols is down in the red zone and, he breaks up a pass on 3rd down and goal. And picks up basically right where he left off his freshman year. And I definitely feel like you're going to see him definitely emerge as I think kind of that strong safety, that guy that's going to make plays on the ball. I think he's going to be a hard-hitting tackler once again. You definitely obviously wanted to see the pass breakup numbers, I think kind of increase, from where he left off, as his freshman year. I definitely feel like at times teams just didn't target him. They didn't really go his way, his side of the field. And I don't think he had as many opportunities to break on the ball, but I would anticipate that he's going to be a huge part of this defense this year, and even if he doesn't have as many plays on the ball, his presence is going to be felt. He's going to be a hard hitting tackler. He's going to be around the football. He's going to be leading this group vocally and just the energy that he brings. And they call him Mike. He's definitely a fan favorite and a team favorite. I definitely feel like if this defensive back room has a huge year, I would anticipate that Michael Richard is going to be a part of it.
If you were to pick a defensive player to have a breakout type season in 2025, who would that be?
I'm gonna actually go with Noah Bigelow, the Pittsburgh transfer. Again, I think when it's all said and done, I think he is going to be opposite, Cedric Woods at that cornerback position. I think again, he's definitely a guy that showed at Pittsburgh that he can play, at multiple times, throughout the season. Maybe he didn't play a ton of reps at Pittsburgh as far as an every down starter. But I think he got a lot of run in the spring. He got a lot of opportunities to play opposite Cedric, and I think at times, we saw him make a couple plays on the ball. He came away with a few interceptions, a couple really nice tackles, in open space. So he's definitely a guy that I would anticipate he's going to get the opposite cornerback spot along with Cedric, and then in turn, I think you're going to see him make some really decent plays on the ball. I think he's going to be a veteran that this defensive backfield definitely will like to have alongside Cedric, because again, if DeMarcus Griffin-Taylor ends up not playing, I think that opposite cornerback spot is going to be so huge next to Cedric Woods, and I feel like Noah Bigelow from Pittsburgh is going to fill that nicely.
Well, we've talked some offense, we've talked defense. Now let's move over to the special teams. How are those units looking, and are there any concerns heading into fall camp?
Yeah, I definitely feel like there's a lot of turnover. This is a team that special teams, offense, defense. There's just a lot of key positions that have just had a lot of turnover. Again, Louisiana Tech's punter from last year, Patrick Ray, he's at James Madison now. Buck Buchanan, their kicker and kickoff guy, he's at Colorado now. So the two most important positions on your special teams are now going to be replaced with a lot of younger guys and guys that got some run in the bowl game. That was encouraging to see. But again, a lot of guys that have not had a lot of opportunity to really play a full collegiate season. Again, at the kicker spot, it's going to be Drew Henderson. He kicked in the Independence Bowl. He was 2 for 2 for his field goal attempts. He made a 44-yarder. Again, I think it's just a guy that has just not kicked a lot at the collegiate level. I think, truthfully, the biggest part that they're going to miss with Buck more than anything field goal wise is just his ability to kick the ball off. You hit 51 touchbacks last year, which is just a weapon to have, especially when you're starting games and you had a defense that was as good as Louisiana Tech of you're starting possessions off for opponents, just well inside their territory, and they have to go earn a drive. Teams are not returning the ball against you. So frankly, I'm curious to see if Drew has the leg to have as many touchbacks and to kind of set opponents up deep in their territory. And again, I think when you're talking about punter as well, they have a new punter as well, John Hoyt Chance. He's a new punter. He had 3 punts in the Independence Bowl. 3 went for touchbacks. So that's an encouraging sign. But I definitely feel like you would have liked to see him maybe pin one back, without a touchback. Yeah. I definitely feel like if those two can have pretty solid seasons, just being relatively young at the collegiate level, I feel like this group will be okay. But if those guys, inexperience wise, I think feel inexperienced and kind of play to that, I definitely feel like this group is going to have a tough season, because you saw at times when Buck did not make his field goals, then in turn this offense really just did not have a lot of options to turn to in the red zone. I mean, they literally beat Western Kentucky only because of Buck Buchanan. I mean, the offense in the red zone was just so poor last year that it was basically, okay, well, at least we have Buck Buchanan that can make a kick for us. And I'm definitely curious to see if Drew, in that kicking role, whether it be kickoffs or field goals, can kind of take up that mantle and say maybe at times that the offense stalls out in a drive or is just looking for any sort of points during the game. Can he handle that pressure? Is he able to make those type of kicks? I think it remains to be seen.
Now that spring practice is over, which position group or groups do you think is the most concerning heading into 2025?
Boy, there's a couple that I would say, but I guess if you're saying the most concerning, I would say probably the defensive line. There's just so much turnover in that room. And not only just the turnover in the room, the position coaches turnover. I just think there's just so much uncertainty when it comes to that defensive line group. And it's such an important position on the field. College football and football in general, if you cannot disrupt an opposing quarterback, if you cannot disrupt an opposing offense before they even get started, you're going to have a tough time. And I think we saw that in the previous 2 seasons under Sonny Cumbie, where this defensive line just got nothing as far as, going after the quarterback. It got nothing as far as, pass rush. And I think in turn, the run defense suffered as well, because teams were just able to say, okay, we're going to pass the football. We're going to run the football. We know that the defensive line has no answer to stop us. I think that's what's most concerning to me is, man, if we're in week 4, week 5, and this defensive line yet has to find truly someone that's going to impact the opposing offense, I think that's going to be concerning because I think that's just going to allow opposing offenses to just tee off and do whatever they want. I definitely feel like if this defensive line and all the guys that have shuffled in and out, if they cannot find a core that can give them stable pass rush and give them stable run defense, I feel like this group is going to be in for a really tough season.
Well, in today's age of NIL, revenue sharing, and the transfer portal, how have you seen that change Louisiana Tech's recruiting philosophy?
Like I think like we've been talking about, throughout this podcast, the recruiting philosophy has changed to go more towards the JUCO route, more towards the Division II route. They'll pick up a couple Division I transfers here and there. Again, like I mentioned, I know a Bigelow from Pittsburgh. They got a couple, I think, defensive backs. I think one from Oklahoma State. Cam Franklin, and I think they might have gotten like I mentioned, Devin Gandy from Sacramento State. But for the most part, it's a lot of junior college guys. It's a lot of guys that have had to kind of wait their turn to kind of move up, to the Division I level. And I think, frankly, that's the way that you have to go. Like you mentioned, in this era of NIL revenue sharing, where you're really, if you want to keep guys that are on your current roster, you can't go out and spend $4,000 on a defensive back transfer from Arkansas or something like that. I mean, you have to be smart and figure out guys that are kind of diamonds in the rough. You have to go to these smaller schools where guys have proven year after year that the schools may be small, the competition may be not that great, but hey, they've proven year after year, at college football that they can be a proven player. And I think you're seeing that across the board for Louisiana Tech, that they're going after these Division II, these JUCO diamonds in the rough guys that have shown that they can prove that they can play, football. I think the days of them going after, 5, 6 Division I transfers, I think those days are kind of far from, those days are far gone. And so I feel like for Louisiana Tech recruiting wise, I think they've embraced that now they have to find guys at the Division II and the JUCO route. And I think for the most part, it's been a pretty successful, game plan. There definitely have been some guys that they've just completely whiffed on, but for the most part, I think the junior college route has been pretty friendly to them.
How do you feel the staff at Louisiana Tech has done navigating the portal, whether that's going and getting guys or even retaining their own roster?
I think when it comes to retention, I think frankly it has not gone well. I think it's been great that Colby Fields and the Michael Richards have wanted to stay here, but frankly those guys have been the exception, not the rule. Again, when you talk about the David Blaze that have transferred, Trey Harris has transferred. Obviously, there's been a couple big defensive pieces over the years that have transfers as well. Tyler Grubbs comes to mind as some defensive position. I think offensively they definitely lost a lot as well. So I feel like as far as retention, I feel like this team could be doing a lot better job. But again, I think if you're Louisiana Tech, I think you just have to recognize that you can't be the NIL factory that people maybe want you to be. I think you just have to be selective and say, hey, these are the guys that we truly cannot lose. And you sometimes might have to bite the bullet and say, you know what, some guys might just leave, and we're gonna have to be okay with that. I think as far as going into the portal and finding guys, again, I think they have to realize that they're going to have to compromise at times. I think they're not going to get into these bidding wars, for guys that are going on visits to SEC, ACC schools. I think they're going to have to find guys that are going to, potentially, Sun Belt American schools and, potentially some junior college, programs and figure out ways to entice them. And I think, frankly, it's really important that they had a great season defensively last year to kind of sell that, hey, at Louisiana Tech, we've proven that we can, in the right system, if you can play up to a high standard, you're going to get national recognition and you're going to get opportunities for other schools to look at you. And I think, frankly, you're starting to see more of a shift towards Louisiana Tech embracing being more of the feeder school, being more of the school where, hey, you come here for 1 year, 2 years, and you prove that you can play at a high level. Other schools are going to come poach you, and they're going to take you up to the high major, the Power 4 level. Like obviously, like a David Blay. Again, that's a guy that came here for a couple of years, had to kind of wait his turn, and then boom, explodes in 2024, and then bang, you're at Miami now playing. And so I think that's kind of the key is pick up these junior college kids and say, hey, you come here, develop. We'll get you for 2 years. You show what you did at the JUCO level. You bring that here to Louisiana Tech, and then but who knows, by the time you're done playing college football, you could be at a Power 4. So I feel like Louisiana Tech has embraced that model, and it's not what a lot of fans want to hear. I know a lot of fans still want Louisiana Tech to be competing for these SEC drop downs. They want to compete for these ACC guys and the Big Ten guys, but for the most part, I think Louisiana Tech for going forward until there's a baseline contract in place, I think going forward is going to be a lot of JUCO, a lot of small school guys.
What do you think the main strength of this 2025 team will be?
I would definitely say in general it's going to be defense. I think if you're talking position group, I think it's going to be defensive, backs. I don't see a way that this offense becomes a strength, at least right now as we sit here, July 1st. I just think there's just so many question marks when it comes to the wide receiver room, when it comes to what that offensive line rotation is going to look like. And I think frankly just how Evan is going to navigate the offensive system that Tony Franklin's going to implement. I think defensively, I think again bringing in an experienced play caller and Coach Olson, someone that's coming off a championship, I think having proven playmakers in that defensive backfield, I think is going to allow the secondary to really flourish. I think if you're saying a strength of this team, I think it definitely starts with the defensive backfield. I think I could hear an argument for a linebacker, but I think when you're talking about the amount of people that they have in that defensive backfield, I definitely feel like it is a group that is going to carry this team. And I think, frankly, at times, maybe have to make plays on the ball and potentially go the other way and score at times because I just feel like this defensive backfield is going to be given a lot of opportunities to make those plays. And I think if the offense really does struggle out of the gate, I think this group is going. The defensive backs are going to be challenged because groups are going to want to put up points on this unit. And I think if the defensive backfield can show that, hey, we're not a group to be messed with, we have veterans in the backfield. I definitely feel like this is a group that can rise to the occasion.
What does success look like for the Bulldogs in 2025?
It's without a doubt making a bowl game. It's without a doubt earning your way to a bowl game. We're in year 4 of the Sonny Cumbie era, and they have yet to have a winning season. Bottom line, they have to make a bowl game, and they have to earn their way to a bowl game by having a winning season. And I think success is just, frankly, getting back to a bowl game. I'm not even saying they have to win the bowl game, frankly. I think just getting back to a bowl game would appease your fan base because I think you just been hearing the rumblings over the past couple of years of the Sonny Cumbie era of, man, I kind of wish we would go back to the Skip Holtz days of, hey, it's a guaranteed bowl game every single year. We're playing in the postseason. We're on a national stage. We're playing, when everyone's home for the holidays. People are watching Louisiana Tech, on ESPN when their families are all home for Christmas and, everyone's gathered around to watch bowl games. Now it's like, man, can Louisiana Tech, hit 5 wins? That's the benchmark. So I feel like if this group can compete for a bowl game, that would be a great season. It would show that this program is truly progressing under Sonny Cumbie. I think that was kind of the sell of keeping Sonny last year before Jeremiah Johnson, their DC, left. Was, hey, we finished 5-8. It was a win-loss improvement compared to the first 2 seasons. We did make a bowl game. We didn't earn it, but we were in a bowl game, and so I think there was talks that hey, this program is progressing. I think the easiest way to show that would be you have a winning season, you make a bowl game under Sonny. I think going into year 4, that is completely reasonable to expect for this group.
Looking at their schedule, is there a stretch of games that you kind of feel is the most critical in terms of them being able to make a bowl game?
Without a doubt, it's the first 6 games. I think that's where they have to pick up the majority, if not all of their wins. I'm just going to read through just an order of their first 6 games, and I'm going to read. So they start the year with Southeastern Louisiana, an FCS team. You should win that game. Okay. Then the next week you go on the road to LSU. LSU will curb stomp them. No shave in that. It's going to be a money game. You're going to get paid, pretty good a chunk of change for that, but it's going to be a loss. Okay. Then you got 3 straight games before your bye week. You're at home for your conference opener against a really bad New Mexico State team that went 3-9 last year. A New Mexico State team that ended up actually beating you. And then you play a Southern Miss team the next week after that has 4 combined wins in the last 2 years. And then you're at UTEP, a team that you're 3-0 against in the Sonny Cumbie era. So you're talking about your first 6 games. And then after the bye week, you play at Kennesaw, a team that went 2-10 last year. So I mean, you talk about those first 6 games, really outside the LSU game, on paper, you could win all of those games. And I think, frankly, those are the games that are going to give you the best shot to front load your wins. Because, man, if you look at the back half of their schedule, I wish them luck because when after that Kennesaw game, in order, this is what their schedule looks like. They're at home against Western Kentucky. They're at home against Sam Houston, 2 teams that are perennially in the conversation for the Conference USA title. Sam Houston won 10 games last year. Western Kentucky is always really good. Okay, then after those 2 games, then you have the pleasure of going on the road, traveling all the way up to Delaware, in the middle of November, and they went 9-2 last year. And then after that, the week after that, you get to go all the way across the country and play a pretty good Washington State team that won 8 games last year. And then your reward after that long road trip is you get to come back home and play Liberty. And then you play Missouri State, who won 8 games last year. So, I mean, you look at those last 6 games. On paper, there's a realistic scenario where they don't win any of those last 6 games. Maybe they steal a win at Delaware. Maybe Washington State or Missouri State, takes a step back. But man, I just feel like when you look at those 6 games on paper, if all 6 of those teams picked up where they left off last year, I think it's going to be really tough for Louisiana Tech to find a way to 6 wins. If they don't find those 6 wins, early off and on, I'm not saying they need to win, all 7 or 6 of those, early season games. But man, if you're talking about Southeastern, New Mexico State, Southern Miss, UTEP, and Kennesaw, and then along with LSU, if you can win, 5, 2, 6 of those 7 games, I feel like you're in great shape. And then, man, if you can find a way to steal one against Delaware or maybe Missouri State, I think you're in good shape. But I think it starts with those first 6 games. You have to take care of business against teams that are either on equal footing with you or, frankly, worse than you. I mean, you have to beat Southern Miss. You have to beat UTEP. And you have to beat Kennesaw. If you do not go 3-0 against those teams, there is no shot to a bowl game, in my opinion. So I think they have to take care of the front load of their schedule, take care of the easier games, and then find a way to pick off a win here and there, when the schedule, kind of gets tougher.
Well, Matt, we've covered a lot of ground today, but is there anything else you want to share or think that we should know about this 2025 Louisiana Tech Bulldogs football team?
I think it's just a team that's hungry. I think it's a team and a fan base that is ready to win. If you've watched Louisiana Tech from an outside perspective over the last couple of years, it's a program that once had a lot of pride. It's a program that was once consistently winning. It was a program that was consistently going to bowl games, and it has fallen short. I was looking at it the other day. This is the first time since the mid '90s that this program has had 4 straight losing seasons. It's been a long time since this program has been back to relevance, and I think this fan base is ready for that. And I think Sonny Cumbie and this coaching staff can feel that. I think he acknowledges that going into year 4, it's time to win. It's time to make a bowl game. It's time to get back to the postseason. And so I would anticipate you're going to see a team that is going to play with that fire. It's going to play with that fire knowing that, frankly, their head coach is on the hot seat. And I think they also understand that this fan base is starving for a winner. And I think, truthfully, again, we'll see what happens in realignment. I think there would be nothing more attractive to the Sun Belt if potentially that move happens than a winning football season. I think that's been a lot of chatter of, why would they want to bring Louisiana Tech when you look at their football track record? I think, man, if you can silence the haters, if you can silence the doubters and say, man, Louisiana Tech football is back to winning and is back to consistency, I think that would be a great thing for not only, Louisiana Tech, but I think Conference USA or Sun Belt or whatever conference, this team ends up being in. So I think it's just a group that's hungry to win, and I think it's a group that understands the stakes are really high in 2025.
Well, Matt, just want to thank you for taking some time out of your day to spend with us and share your knowledge. We greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries. Happy to help, and definitely looking forward to this football season, seeing what it has in store for us.
Absolutely. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you're listening in podcast form, please rate and review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Thank you all for your support. And until the next time, we are the G5 Hive.
Fight, fight, fight for red and blue. Show your might and we'll root for you. Get on your toes and you meet your foes and don't let them break through.